Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Carrie and this is a video that has been on my mind for years, and I have decided there's never a good time to make a video about being scared of flying, so I'm just gonna make it today. So this one goes out to all of my anxious flyers. This is gonna be a long video and I'm just going to kind of walk you through almost every step of a flight, just kind of covering what you can expect in your typical journey, and hopefully it makes things a little bit easier. Full disclaimer, I am still an anxious flyer. I wrote this script. I know everything that is in this video already, right? It's not gonna cure any flight anxiety, but I have found that the more knowledge I have of something, the more equipped I am to kind of talk myself down. Do I still have like rapid heart rate every time I fly? Absolutely. Some trips are perfect, sometimes aren't. But hopefully with this knowledge, you can kind of navigate flying through the air. And so most of this information and kind of this entire video is kind of inspired by my dad, who has flown planes his whole life, not professionally, but just for fun. He's obsessed with airplanes. Whenever I was flying as a kid, which was often, if there was ever anything that kind of freaked me out on a plane, I would just look over and my dad would explain like, oh, that noise was this. Like I said, it's just very helpful to have a bit of knowledge, and in case you have never flown before, hopefully this lets you know what to expect. I find that when I'm expecting something, I'm able to handle it better, right? So are we ready? Is that all I had to say? Mainly just know that like almost everyone I've ever spoken to has some level of flight anxiety. You're not alone whatsoever in this. So that being said, let's get on an airplane. We're gonna breeze through the whole getting on the airplane thing. You will probably be greeted by the cabin crew. They might point you to your seat depending on how big your airplane is, and then you will go put your bags in the overhead or below and sit down. Watch everybody else file on. There's nothing you can really do at this time. You're going to hear a lot of dinging throughout the plane, and that's just the flight attendants communicating to each other because they have a checklist of things they need to do in order to get the plane completely ready so that we can start taxiing. Ignore the dings, ignore the cross-check. It's not for you. So sit back, try to relax. You've got this. Most people feel the most nerves when it comes to takeoff and landing, so these are going to be the largest portions of the video. I'm going to go through it in detail. There will be timestamps in the description box if you want to jump around. Let's start with takeoff. Your plane has now pulled out. It is starting to taxi. You might be getting in line to wait for your chance to take off. And this is a good time to remind yourself that there are airplanes taking off constantly. Planes are usually staggered by just a few minutes. So a plane has likely taken off a few seconds before you. If there was some weird weather stuff going down, air traffic control would know and they wouldn't let you take off either. So no matter if it's raining, if it's windy, just know that someone else did it right before you. Someone else is gonna do it right after you. You're all gonna be okay. My dad actually said that he enjoyed flying on like slightly bad weather days, like not perfect weather days, because the quote unquote amateurs weren't up in the sky, right? You are surrounded by professionals in the air, on the airplane with you, and on the ground. Especially during this time, you are being so closely monitored, you're in good hands. But it's still terrifying, so here's where my first tip comes in. I always prepare a playlist of really happy, kind of high energy dancing music. That can be whatever dance music is to you. My mom always told me if I was ever scared of the dark or something like that, she always told me to sing a happy song, because if you think of like a horror movie, if the soundtrack was Walking on Sunshine, it would not be scary. Or I recently saw a TikTok of a girl who said that whenever she starts to get sad, she'll put on Party Rock Anthem. And it's impossible to be sad while listening to it. We're kind of working with that psychology, and it works twofold. Number one, it kind of distracts you, kind of fakes you into a good mood, but also moving your body is really important. We're going to talk about that a little bit later when I talk more about turbulence, but if the plane is bumpy, because it's going to be bumpy during takeoff, if you're kind of bopping to music like this, the actual movement of the airplane feels less, right? You can't really tell what's you and what's the airplane. So have a playlist, happy music, ready to go. You've waited in line, now you are cleared for takeoff. Normally, the pilot will get on and say something like, "Flight attendants, please be seated," or a flight attendant might get on and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cleared for takeoff." Off we go. So you're going to be sitting. The engines are going to fire before you really start to move. You're going to hear a big whoosh, and then it's going to start moving. Every time, I cannot express to you how many flights I have been on. Every time a plane is taking off, I tell myself it's not going fast enough. I'm like, we've got to go faster to get this lift. You might think that it's going to go from like 0 to 100 real quick. No, it's kind of a slow roll, but it's still fast enough that you might be pushed back into your seat a little bit. And a little bit after that, longer than you'd expect. Always a little bit longer than I'd like, okay? Because I'm nervous and I want this off the ground, right? Give it time. Eventually you will feel the front wheels lift off, and then you'll feel the back wheels. And when the back wheels come up, you're gonna get this kind of whoosh, like very light, hopefully, but a little whoosh sensation. Your stomach might do a little bit of a flip. You're good. You are off the ground. Excellent work. Right after that though, depending on where you're sitting in the airplane, what kind of airplane you're on, you're gonna hear a thump and possibly actually feel a bump coming from the bottom of the airplane, which doesn't sound like a good thing, right? It is the wheels actually being protracted. So while you're in the air flying, you don't want your landing gear out hanging there. So right when you take off, those wheels will go shoop. And the way that it locks in to the airplane sometimes makes a pretty significant thump. And if you're not expecting it, it's kind of scary, but that's a good thing. It's a very good sound. Now, during your initial ascent, you will most likely be feeling quite a few bumps. That's just how air works. And you'll also probably be experiencing the plane turning quite a bit. A plane can go pretty sideways, so you might be doing some pretty significant turning. And this is where my next tip comes in. And you should have started this from the second you heard the first engines go whoosh, right? You want to focus on completely relaxing your body. You will get really tense. I'm the kind of person that it's like shoulders are up to my ears. That physical manifestation of anxiety is gonna hurt you, and it's the one thing you can really control. You might not be able to trick your brain or slow down your heart, but you can change how you're sitting. So drop your shoulders, wiggle your fingers, unclench your jaw. And this goes for even as you're watching this video right now, because you're probably tense. Relax your legs. My thighs get so tense, okay? Relax your legs, rotate your ankles, relax your forehead. Like, just kind of have a checklist. Try and focus on every single part of your body and relax it. And then by the time you're done, your shoulders have probably gone back up again. So start the checklist again. And just kind of focusing on your body, keeping yourself really, really relaxed is going to distract you. Kind of having that checklist of things really helps me, but also it tricks the rest of your kind of nervous system into calming down just a little bit. So how your initial ascent works is that your pilot is in constant conversation with air traffic control on the ground. They're telling your pilot exactly what they're allowed to do. So that's why you might turn multiple times. You might need to be heading west and you took off facing east. You might turn and go north for a little bit before you're given clearance to turn and go the direction you need to go. So that's why there might be quite a bit of turning, but the thing that might scare you the most is leveling off and reaching your cruising altitude. So every plane has a planned altitude that it's going to be cruising at for most of the flight, but because the air around an airport is so busy, air traffic control might not let you go from the ground, climb straight up to that altitude. They might clear you for 10,000 feet. And then they might clear you for 20,000 feet. So while you're climbing, you might have to do something called leveling off. I don't know if that's actually the official term, but for a split second, because of physics, which I didn't take in high school, so forgive me, this is going to be a little amateur. It's going to feel like you're descending because you're going really fast up And then as the airplane levels, the speed of your body and the speed of your airplane doesn't quite match. So you might, in your chair, do a little woo, and because of that, it might feel like a descent. Split second. I'm talking like millisecond, but for someone who's really anxious, that could feel like an eternity. It can be scary if you're not expecting it. So just know this is totally part of a normal, planned ascent, okay? You might level off more than once. Think of if you're in a car and you're driving uphill pretty fast, you're accelerating to get up the hill, and then you get over it and you go straight. Your body, again, does that. You're not going down, just leveling out, okay? Now, if you're lucky, and I wish this for everyone on every flight, you will have a very smooth ascent. There will be no turbulence. It will just be like a smooth glide all the way to your destination. But typically that doesn't happen. Turbulence is caused by a few things, but usually when it comes to takeoff, you are traveling up through different layers of pressure in the atmosphere. I'm so sorry, I'm not a science-minded person. Because of the change in pressure as you're climbing, the air is gonna have little bumps in it, and it's just kind of unavoidable and natural. Your pilot is aware of almost every bump that's coming their way. They fully know the conditions. It's just frustrating when you don't. So one way that you can kind of expect turbulence is to look for clouds. And so if you're flying on like a perfectly clear day, not a cloud in the sky, I'm sorry, turbulence is going to be invisible and you're going to get through it. I promise you're going to get through it. But if there are clouds in the sky, one way that you can kind of mentally prepare, this isn't a perfect science, but mentally preparing for turbulence is to see when you're about to go through a layer of cloud. Even if it's just like one puffy cloud, if you're kind of at its level in the air, you can guess that you might get a little bump, especially if the cloud cover is thick enough that you actually go through it and all you can see is cloud, which isn't my favorite thing. If you look out the window and all you see is gray or white, right? Even if you can barely see the wing sometimes, it's okay. Just know that in that time, there's going to be jiggling. One thing that really helps me, I always sit at a window seat. I will look up and you will eventually be able to see the top of the cloud. You'll be able to see clear sky, and you know that that's where the cloud breaks. Once you get up there, that's where you're probably gonna have pretty clear air. So just like keep looking and know your plane is ascending. You are going to get through those clouds, and all you need to do is be brave enough, wait it out until you break through the clouds. Sometimes because, again, you're given certain permissions for how high you're allowed to go, sometimes your plane is kind of stuck at the very top of the clouds, and this is a bumpy area, but my dad, as a pilot, personally loves that. He thinks it's very fun. I'm sure it's very beautiful from the cockpit. I'm sure your pilots are having a good time. Just kind of pretend, I think my dad calls it surfing on the clouds. You're so close to clear air. It is within reach, and eventually you will boop, pop up and be in the clear sky, and hopefully you can just enjoy the gorgeous view. Kind of anticipating when turbulence is going to come really helps me. Like giving myself a time limit, like I just need to get there and we'll be okay. That really helps me manage my anxiety. So clouds, in a weird way, are your friends, okay? Frenemies, I suppose. And really the last portion of the takeoff is going to be the seatbelt sign. The way that pilots use the seatbelt sign varies incredibly by airline, and I think kind of by individual pilot, I'm not sure. Some pilots will take off the seatbelt sign within, like, we're still ascending. Like, we will take off, do a couple turns, and they'll be like, flight attendants, feel free to walk about the cabin, you know, like, it's crazy. And then I've been on some airlines where the pilot doesn't even take off the seatbelt sign for practically the whole flight, and there's no turbulence. So the seatbelt sign, for your safety, if you are seated, keep your seatbelt on, okay? It's just better for everybody. If the seatbelt sign is on, don't think like, oh my God, we're gonna go through turbulence, I'm so scared. sometimes they just keep it on. Maybe they just don't want you walking in the aisle, you know? It's not a big deal. So whether it remains on or not, you're safe. You're good. You have reached cruising altitude. And usually at this point, the flight attendants will start walking around, preparing to give you drinks or your meal, depending on how long your flight is. Sometimes if it's a really short flight, the flight attendants don't even get up. It totally depends, but at this point you will see movement about the cabin, and typically the captain will come on and say, "Hi, I'm Captain so-and-so. Thank you so much for joining us. We've reached our cruising altitude." Hopefully they say, "Looks like we're gonna have a clear flight." Sometimes they say, "Hey, we might have a little bit of turbulence ahead of us, but we'll let you know. We're gonna get you to your destination safely. Have a great flight." Boom! You've done it. This is one of the scariest parts of flying. You have reached your cruising altitude. There you go. You did it. Now, this section will vary slightly depending on the length of your flight. Regardless of distance, even on short flights, I think that this info will be similar. My personal favorite thing to do on an airplane is to watch the map on the screen the entire time. And then I watch whatever movie the person in front of me is watching, you know? And the reason is, number one, I'm a little neurotic. But number two, it actually can give you a clue as to when to expect turbulence, because I'm an anxious flyer. That's all that's on my mind. When it's smooth, I'm like, when are the bumps coming? And when the bumps come, I'm like, when's it gonna stop? That's my whole shtick for like a 15-hour flight, right? And even if your flight doesn't have a screen with a map on it, if it's a clear day, you can look out the window and these tips can kind of help you as well. As I already mentioned, turbulence is caused by a bunch of different things, and one of those things is, again, change in air pressure, but really it's kind of dependent on the geography of what you're flying over. And so if you look at your map, or if you look out the window and you see that you are about to cross a coastline, let's say you are flying over land and you're about to fly over water, or if you're flying over water and you're about to start flying over land, this could be a lake, an ocean. You can mentally prepare yourself that it's gonna be a little bit of a bump, and that's simply because of the way that air acts over land and the way that air acts over water. That can kind of put your mind at ease when you look down and you're like, okay, in this moment we're gonna have some bumps. And if there aren't any, great. If there are, you are prepared. Another time that this happens is flying over mountain ranges. I used to fly California to New York, New Jersey all the time. If we're going over Colorado, there's gonna be bumps. And so I would just look out the window and watch as we cross the Rocky Mountains. And once we were kind of a significant distance from the mountains, I knew that the air would be clear. So again, I could kind of physically give myself like, be brave until then. Like, you just have to be brave enough to get over the mountain and then the turbulence will be over, right? Now, for weather related turbulence or just kind of choppy air, you might not be able to see it. I mean, obviously you would be able to see like a thunder cloud, but for other things, they are seemingly invisible to you. But you best believe your pilot knows about it. And not only do they have really great weather tracking technology right now, but we also have a plane right in front of us. Surprise! Another really great thing to keep in mind while you're flying is that you are not alone up there in the sky. If you actually look, I'll link it down below if I can find it, but there are maps online of like all of the current flights in the air right now, and you can just see there's thousands of flights. So that kind of makes me feel better. But the really great thing about that is that pretty much no matter where you're flying, there's going to be an airplane that has cut through the same air that you're going through 10 minutes, 20 minutes before you. And if they encounter some bumps, they're going to tell air traffic control. Air traffic control is going to tell your pilot. So you are getting super accurate, like minute by minute updates of what is to come. Not you, but your pilot. So they are prepared for everything. And that's why they can switch on the seatbelt sign even before any bumps happen. Sometimes they might wait it out and it might get a little bumpy and then they'll be like, okay, we'll put it on. Sometimes they'll say, we don't need the seatbelt, okay? But just know that your pilot knows everything that's happening before it happens. But let's say that you do have to go through turbulence and it is relatively severe. Something to remember is that these planes are built for this. Personally, I'm too scared to watch it. My dad always recommends it. I just don't want to watch it. But if you're brave enough, there are videos of when they are testing airplanes. They put an airplane in a wind tunnel. If the wind gets crazy enough, like hurricane levels, like something that an airplane would not be allowed to take off in, like the chances of you being in the air for this is slim to none. Airplane wings can practically flap. They are not going to snap off. They are actually very, very pliable, flexible. Your airplane is built for weather that air traffic control wouldn't let it fly in. Okay? Weirdly, one thing that does make me feel better is looking at certain airplanes that have gone through scary weather conditions and knowing that everybody was okay. There was one case in particular that was extremely rare, hence why it was on the news, okay? There was an airplane that got caught in a freak thunderstorm and it got pelted by hail that was like the size of softballs. It got hit so bad that the nose of the plane fell off and it still landed just fine. Were people probably traumatized and physically sick from that experience? Yes. Was everyone okay? Also yes. Just know that your plane will almost never be in that situation. That was such a freak situation that it made the news. And I haven't heard anything like that recently. This is years and years and years ago. Planes can get beat up. They are not going to fall out of the sky. Weather will never make your plane fall out of the sky. Okay? So turbulence, it's not fun, but your pilot is very aware. Now, because they're aware, there are some things that a pilot can do. They can try ascending or descending a little bit to get into a clear pocket of air. Usually the higher up you go, the clearer the air is because the air pressure is really low up there. You're essentially in space. You're not. Again, not a science person, don't listen to anything I have to say. They can also try and go around certain, if there's some kind of storm going on, they can go around it if there's like a pressure system that they can avoid. So again, they are in constant conversation with someone on the ground, walking them through where they can go, what they can do. One time though, I was on a flight, actually last September, going from San Francisco to Newark. We were warned ahead of time by our pilot, which I personally, as someone who's very anxious, love a chatty pilot. And this pilot was talking the whole flight about what we were gonna expect, what we're flying over. If you look out your window on the left, you're gonna see this. Like, I love. But our pilot came on and basically said, hey guys, for the next 40 minutes, it might be bumpy. And from Canada to Mexico, from border to border, across the US, across the middle, it's just choppy air. He was like, we cannot go around it. We're just gonna have to go through it. And so again, if the weather was that bad, air traffic control would have you on the ground safely at an airport instead of telling you to go through it. Really, what a pilot does when they're trying to avoid turbulence is they're doing it for your comfort and your safety. And if they are cleared to go through it, know that no matter how severe it might feel to you, it's safe to go through. And so like I said during takeoff, having really happy dance music is really, really helpful during turbulence. And the best part is on an airplane, because you're sitting so close to people, it's actually really difficult to see what the person right next to you is doing. So if the person next to me was kind of grooving, I don't think I'd notice. And especially if it's turbulence, no one's really gonna notice some extra movement, right? I put on my music and I just kind of sit in my chair and I do a little this. Okay, again, it tricks me. I don't know what is my body moving and what is the plane moving. It kind of balances out a little bit and makes the turbulence feel less bad, and it also is kind of a fake it till you make it sort of situation where, because I'm like, oh, I'm so carefree just dancing to my music, I'm pretending that I'm not scared, and through pretending I'm not scared, I feel a little less scared. Those are on my good days. On my bad days, sometimes all I can do is turn off my music, turn off whatever movie or stop looking at the book that I'm reading, right? And I will just sit in my chair, again, trying to constantly relax my body, and I will stare at the map and just time how long the turbulence is. And I practice breathing exercises and they really work. It seems so silly, but they really do help. Again, kind of having a checklist, sort of having something else to focus on. There are tons of breathing exercises that you can find online, but really like counting the number of seconds you breathe in, counting the number of seconds you breathe out. Those are my 2 tips. Breathing exercises and just being quiet and focused, or dance the night away. Both are great. Apologies, my mic wasn't on. Fix that problem. Sorry. So the end of my little turbulence talk is just that, again, The pilots know what's going on. They really just care about your comfort and your safety. The plane is completely fine with whatever the world is going to throw at it. And panicking is really only going to hurt you. Sometimes, again, like with the seatbelt sign, depending on the kind of pilot you have or the airline you're flying, they will get on and say like, prepare for severe turbulence or something like that. Some of them are just a little trigger happy, you know, like it might not even be that bad. And again, panicking is only going to hurt you. Just take it as a sign of like, they know what's up. They're paying attention. They have been briefed of the situation. The pilot knows what's going on. That's all you can really do. So just make sure that your drinks are not full so that they don't spill. Take a sippy sip and dance, right? Always dance. But now let's go back to what I said earlier about there being an airplane right in front of you, relaying info back to you, right? About the turbulence. Yeah, like I said, lots of planes in the sky, which I find comforting, but when you see another plane out your window, that can be kind of scary. And so here's the rules of the air. You are never going to be close enough to touch a plane. Absolutely not. Air traffic control is aware of every flight that is in the air. That's why, again, during takeoff, when you're climbing, you're only cleared for a certain amount at a time. The typical rule of thumb that I recently learned, actually, from my dad, is that if you are flying east, and that includes northeast, southeast, right? You are traveling at an odd number altitude. So 31,000 feet, 35,000 feet, etc. If you're flying any kind of westward way, you fly an even number, 30,000, 32, 34. Your concept of distance and depth is really messed up when you are looking out an airplane window. So it might look like a plane is very close to you. I guarantee they are at least 1,000 feet away from you at all times. Now, if you are like me and you stare at your screen, the map will also typically show you your altitude. If you know that you are flying east, but the map says that you are flying at an even number, don't freak out. Sometimes that number is slightly incorrect. Just know that all of the controls and dials and everything in the cockpit are correct and they are flying correctly. This also goes for your landing. A lot of times airports will have multiple runways. So as you are approaching the airport, you might see another airplane coming in at the same time as you, and it might look like you guys are landing at the same time right next to each other. They are definitely going to be landing on a different runway. You're not gonna race and see who gets there first. And also, if you can see an airplane that close, best believe your pilots see it too. So you're okay. You're okay. During the rest of your flight, other than turbulence, you really don't have that much to worry about or to make you very anxious. My tips are basically to stay hydrated. You can ask for water all the time. If you feel bad about dinging, there's a call button for flight attendants. If you feel bad about dinging for your flight attendant often for water, I never use that button. You can go to the back of the plane and ask for more water. For longer flights, they occasionally come around with a water bottle or some cups of water. You can also bring an empty water bottle and bring it to the airport, and there will be potable water stations for you, and you can fill it up even before the flight. Stay hydrated. Airplanes are dehydrating. Another thing is to just take care of your circulation. So be constantly rolling your ankles and stuff like that. If you feel uncomfortable getting up, that's kind of the best thing to be doing. But I do recommend, if you're on a much longer flight, getting up and while you're waiting for the bathroom or something, which is typically by the emergency exit area, try and do a little bit of a stretch. Everyone does, so it's not going to look weird, but just do a couple leg stretches, do a little, rotation. If you're on a much larger plane, sometimes at the very back, they have a whole area that's just for standing. Sometimes airlines will even have a snack bar that they don't advertise, but it's there. Looking at you, Air France, didn't know you had free chocolate and cookies out the whole flight until the very end of the flight, and that was rude. But again, if you're nervous about walking around, just be sure that you are doing whatever kind of stretching you can. And then this is super random. Speaking of long haul flights, this is something that I have only noticed on a couple of airplanes, but just in case this happens to you, I want you to go in with this knowledge. If you're on a flight that is more than 10 hours, I don't know the official time, but definitely 10 hours, you're going to have a new shift come on, like a completely different cabin crew, a new pilot, everything is going to be switched, because if you are working for more than 10 hours straight, that's not good, right? This happened especially during my Seoul to LAX flights or Seoul to San Francisco flights. We would be like neither near Russia nor near Alaska. This was the time that we are like over open ocean, where I am at my wit's end in terms of anxiety, and I start to smell the distinct smell of burning hair. Any kind of burning smell on an airplane is not fun, especially when you are like hour flights away from the nearest land, okay? And it took me a couple times, but I realized I kind of sit in the same area of the plane, and so I realized I was sitting by where the cabin crew's quarters are. During the first part of the flight, the second shift of flight attendants are actually in a separate area where they have little bunks and stuff like that. Right before they come out to start their shift, they're getting ready. They were probably sleeping, so they're putting on makeup, or they're doing their hair, or they're getting their uniform on. They would be using like a straightener or a hair dryer, and you could smell that very distinct, like when you straighten your hair, you know, that kind of slightly burnt smell. I could smell it and it freaked me out. But just know, if that happens kind of mid-flight for you, chances are it's your flight attendants getting ready for work for the day. So don't freak out. That's a random one, but like it threw me into a loop more than once. So another totally random thing that has never happened to me in my life, this is so rare, okay, but just in case you need to make an emergency landing. Typically, your emergency landing is going to be linked to a medical emergency. That has nothing to do with your airplane, okay? Your airplane is fine, but there is a passenger that needs immediate medical attention that they can't get on this airplane. So you might hear an announcement asking, hey, is there a doctor on board? There's always a doctor on board, trust me. They will look at the patient, and if it seems like we need to get this patient to a hospital as soon as possible, your plane is going to request to land at the nearest possible airport. The thing about flights is that every single part of your flight has been mapped out perfectly, including how much fuel you have and how much your plane is going to weigh when it lands. So if you are landing earlier than planned, and I'm talking about much earlier than planned, if you for some reason get in an hour early, good for you, great job. But if this is like many hours before you are prepared to land, your plane is heavier than it is supposed to be when it's landing. And if something is heavier, it takes a lot more time to slow down, and you want your plane to slow down when you're landing, okay? So typically during an emergency landing, what you would have to do is you would have to dump some of your fuel. So what you're gonna do before you land is your flight might circle a little bit, not like hardcore circling, but just, you know, flying around aimlessly and dumping fuel. That fuel will evaporate before it ever hits the ground, so don't worry, you're not like covering some unsuspecting person in plane oil, okay? But they will take some time to dump out some fuel so that you are light enough so that you can land safely. You will get that passenger or whatever emergency it was. If it was a mechanical emergency, for example, get that taken care of. Refuel, and you'll be on your way. I have been flying for over 30 years, definitely more than 100 flights. I can't even count. Like, I can't tell you how often I fly. It has never happened to me. I was almost on a flight that it happened to. I've been close, but not quite, for making an emergency landing. If your pilot is able to get on the intercom and tell you, hey guys, we're doing a planned emergency landing, it means that he's in control and able to land this plane. Usually it's just trying to get another person to safety, right? There it is, okay? But let's talk about a normal landing, okay? Because we just got through the flight. So it's time to land this baby. Typically, the last 40 to 25 minutes of your flight are for your descent. You might start to feel it more in your ears than anything else, the change of pressure as you're coming back down. Pretty much everything that I said for takeoff applies here, just in reverse, in terms of being cleared for the descent. Air pressure changes equals a bit more bumpiness. And I personally feel like you're more aware of the bumps during landing because something about descending and hitting a bump makes it feel worse than you're ascending and hitting a bump. Again, no science backing this, but just for me personally, I'm more aware of kind of the drop feeling. Also though, sometimes I'm really lucky and by the time we're landing, my body is so desensitized. I have been anxious for 12 hours or something like that. So I just don't have any more energy to care. And I find that my anxiety is a little bit less during landings because I'm just worn out. I'm tired. And one thing that really helps me is remembering that your pilot likely flies this route over and over and over again. So especially for international flights, your pilot probably flies this at least once a week, minimum once a week, probably more. So they know this approach and this landing, they could do it with their eyes closed. I don't want them to, but they could. There's autopilot, so they could. Even for smaller domestic airports, your pilot might not fly into it every day, but this is not their first rodeo. They know the surrounding area so well, they probably land this all the time. So for example, when we were flying to Prague, our pilot was Czech. This was his home airport. He knows this like the back of his hand, and the wind didn't faze him. It shouldn't faze you either. They are professionals. You got this. And even more than when you take off, when you are landing, your plane is going to be making a bunch of creepy noises where if you don't know what they are, it could be really scary. Here are some noises you shouldn't be afraid of. Your plane. Yes, we want it to touch the ground, but what we really want it to do is slow down. So one noise that you're gonna hear that you might not like is this sort of like kind of sound, and that is the wings lengthening. Imagine if you put your hand out a car window and you go like this, it moves fast, but if you go like this, suddenly the wind pushes you back, right? So the wing is elongating and kind of going down so that it slows you down, right? Again, didn't take physics, but that's kind of how it works. You want that to happen. So the plane noise isn't the most fun to hear. If you don't hear it, that's fine too. But if you do hear it, it's the wing. Another good sound is another big thunk. And depending on where you're sitting, again, just like with takeoff, you might actually feel kind of like a jolt coming from the belly of the plane. That is your landing gear coming back out. So again, great noise. We want wheels to land on. Hearing that thunk is a very good noise. Okay. Now I'm going to cover this. This has happened to me a grand total of one time in my life that I remember, okay? There might have been times as a child, but in my memory, one time when a plane has to do something called a go-around. I truly hope this doesn't happen to you, but in the off chance that it does, I want to let you know about them. So a go-around is when your plane attempts to land and your pilot decides that for a plethora of reasons, they need to try again. It's not safe to land in the way that it looks like we're going to, so let's try again. They usually kind of basically take off again, do a circle, get back in line, attempt again. A lot of times this has to do with weather, specifically if there's some kind of crosswind. It might make it a little bit difficult for a plane to land perfectly. Pilots are trained for this. They're not gonna land unless it's safe. You would much rather have a pilot fly around again and attempt than have a pilot be like, let's land this baby and just land on one wheel, because then you're gonna teeter-totter. There's a chance that your wing could touch. Like, they're not gonna risk it. Not only is their goal to get you to your destination safely, but the pilots are driving these things and they want to get home safely too. So they're not gonna play around with one of the most riskiest parts of the flight, right? If you do a go around, just be like, thank you, my pilot is not a daredevil, I'm in good hands. Okay? It only happened to me once in my lifetime. I hope it never happens to you, but just in case. So now, The last 5 minutes of your flight, let's talk about it. We're going in for the landing. Final approach. My last little tip for you, and this is just a personal preference, so like you do you, whatever, but if you are landing over water, looking at you, San Francisco, Kansai, I think Boston, there are some runways that as you are coming in to land, you are just getting closer and closer to water. I don't enjoy it in any way, shape, or form. The last second, a runway appears and you land. You can look up ahead of time what your runway looks like, just to mentally prepare. San Francisco is my least favorite airport simply because of the landing. If you are flying into an airport that has a nearby water landing situation, I don't look out the window because no matter how many times I've landed perfectly, I still psych myself out and I'm like, this is it. We're gonna land in the water. Do yourself a favor and just don't look out the window. However, if you are having a landing that is over a city or over a suburb, or over land in any way, shape, or form, I really enjoy looking out the window. It helps distract me. It's really nice. So shout out to LAX, my beloved San Diego airport. Newark, Heathrow, for example, very lovely. As you are coming down, regardless of if you have water or city underneath you, you are probably going to pass some kind of fence or barrier. There's going to be a strip of either just concrete or grass, and then you are going to see the runway, which looks like the runway you took off from, just like a giant street. In a matter of seconds, you will feel the bump of your plane touching down, and at that point, you might do a little wiggle, you might do a little sideways wiggle, a little swerving, fine. And then you're gonna hear a big whooshing sound, especially if you're sitting near the wings. That is just the airplane slowing down. It's just, that's all it is. It just is noisy. It's a noisier situation than takeoff, I personally think. It'll be like about 5 seconds, it'll feel longer, but it's probably like 5 seconds of noise, and then you will feel the plane really slow down to a point where it's just driving. You will taxi, maybe for a really long time, depending on the airport, and you will reach your gate. And that's it. You've made it. Before I let you go, some general tips that really help me. Number one is I love FlightAware. FlightAware is a website that shows every single flight in the world. You can watch it live whenever any of my loved ones are on a flight. I always ask them for their flight number and I will watch it the entire day, depending on how long their flight is, to make sure that they get to their destination safely. One thing that I love to do, it's like a family thing. My whole family does this. We all check kind of the history of our flight. So your flight, this isn't just like a random flight that they just scheduled just for today. Usually it has a schedule where if it's not every single day, maybe it's a flight that leaves every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, maybe it's a Saturday, Sunday flight, etc. Either way, it leaves multiple times a week. And so you can take your flight number, you can plug that number in, and you can see the exact flight path that your flight goes on. So you can kind of tell yourself, again, looking, okay, I'm gonna be flying over these mountain ranges, which also, if you're like me, you can check the weather before you leave as well, just so you're even more mentally prepared. But you can also learn about delays, especially if you are trying to catch another flight and it seems like your flight always gets in late. Have a game plan for how you're going to deal with that at the airport if you miss your other flight, right? You can go back months. I mean, you have like so much information about the flight that you are on, the exact time that it left, the exact length of the flight, even stuff like flight speed and exact altitude. I mean, it's you really get a lot there. So I like to check FlightAware just so that I know the most information I can possibly know about my flight before I get on it. And this is also helpful to remind you that this flight happens all the time. Maybe you only fly once a year. Maybe this is your first flight ever, but for your pilot, for your crew, for this aircraft, they do this multiple times a week, especially for international flights. Usually there's one every single day at the same time for me. When I get nervous, all I can remind myself is that yesterday a plane full of people did the exact thing I'm about to do, and tomorrow a plane full of people are gonna do the same thing that I just did. Again, just knowing that this is something that is so practiced, so monitored, so many people are doing it. That's something I can remind myself to calm myself down. And the last thing is picking your seat on the airplane. I always fly economy, so if you're flying business or first class, I can't help you, but I would love if you want an anxiety coach. I would absolutely sit next to you if you want to buy me a ticket. I'm an economy girl, and I always try to sit, first of all, I like the window. Some people, their anxiety is based on claustrophobia, so if you need more room, you can sit in an aisle seat. But I personally like looking out the window. So I do a window seat, and I always try to sit around the wing of the plane because that's the middle of the plane. So the turbulence that you feel is the least amount of turbulence. If you're sitting on the ends, like the very, very back or the very, very front, you will feel the turbulence a little bit more. The center of the plane is the rock, okay? I always try to sit there. I usually sit a little bit behind the wing. I think technically right in front of the wing is supposed to be the sturdiest. And yeah, again, sometimes I have really a good control over my anxiety and I have a wonderful flight. Sometimes I am a nervous wreck. So just know that every flight is going to be different, but it's just something that you have to kind of practice, and don't beat yourself up about it. Again, flying as a concept, like a human being putting themselves in a metal container thousands of feet in the air and flying at an incredible speed. Like, it sounds crazy. Your fears are very valid and legitimate, but just know that the more information that you have about flying, the better it is. Sometimes I even watch bad weather landings. I think it's my dad's fault because he's on Instagram and he'll like videos about airplanes and then they show up on my Discover feed. Sometimes I will see like, look at this landing with crazy crosswinds. It just goes to show planes can do so much more than what we do to them on commercial flights. Just know that you are in such good hands, and I just wish you the best of flights. Again, this is coming from a passenger perspective. If anyone watching this, if you've made it this far, if you are a part of the flight crew in any way, or you work on the ground, whatever it is, feel free to correct me or give more tips. Yeah, that's just what I have put together through my couple decades of being a nervous flyer. So yeah, thank you for sitting through this very long video. Again, I just didn't know when to post this. I wish you all the best, safe travels. Hope you have a wonderful trip wherever you're going, and I will catch you guys next time. So see you then, okay? Bye.